Welcome to the Christian Campfire Conversations podcast, where we have real conversations about real topics. Our goal is to educate believers in order to fulfill the Great Commission. So without further ado, let's get on to the podcast.
What's up, my basic family? We are here with my boy Keegan, and I'm Max Moore, and we're also joined by a gal by the name of Ashley Chestnut. So Ashley actually is an author, and she is a associate young adult minister is her official title. So she works with young adults. She has been working at the Church of Brook Hills in Birmingham, Alabama for what you told me 14 years in young adult ministry. So that's awesome. So what we always start off, how's your week been, Ashley?
One of my go-to questions now is like, what are you enjoying recently? So let me answer that one. And one of the things I enjoyed recently is I went to an art festival this weekend in my hometown.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's fun, yeah.
So all the local artists and vendors and food trucks and beautiful weather. It was great. What about
Right.
y'all?
Keegan, you go. My week was busy.
My week
Really
was
busy.
Well, I can tell you're from Alabama using the y'all. You know, us Midwesterners, we use that. We use it, a little bit, but not as much as the Southern people, huh?
Do you also call soda pop?
What do we call it, Max? I don't know. Is it
Uh,
pop?
give me a pop.
Yeah, give me a pop.
Yeah, we don't say soda.
Yeah, no, we're normal.
It's just all Coke. Where we live, it's just all Coke. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But no, my week's been good. Been nice and productive. And one thing I've been enjoying recently, I'll answer that question too. I like that one. Let's see. One thing I've been enjoying is pretty broad, but just meeting new people and getting to hear everybody's stories is that's part of my job, and then also what I do for fun. So it's nice when those overlap.
That's dope. My week has been, I guess it's like early in the week to be asking how our week was been, but my week's been all right. The one thing I've been enjoying is like I am almost done. So like I can see the light at the end of the tunnel for high school, and for finals are on Friday. So I'm like right there.
Max, you should just like not go to college. It's really worth it. I would highly recommend.
Dude, I think we have different plans. So I actually want to be like educated. You know,
right? I'm gonna support you.
So Ashley's book is called "It's Not Just You," and my sister actually got me on this book. She was like, hey, after listening to our podcast with Michael, she was like, hey, I really like this topic that you guys did, but it'd be different and it'd be better if it was like from a girl's perspective as well. And so she's like, I've been reading this book and that'd be dope if you could have her on your podcast. So I just sent Ashley an email without even telling Keegan. And then she emailed back. And then Keegan was like, who is this Ashley girl that you just emailed?
Why is there random girls in our DMs, or I mean our email? Yeah.
So then I was like, actually I invited her to be on our podcast. So yeah, this was not double checked through Keegan until after we got stuff planned out. And Keegan was
for the ride.
Keegan's rolling with the punches.
Not as Keegan made it sound to be either.
Right.
So no, I'm excited. So in the first half of the book, you talked about why our sexuality is broken, and you kind of have some alarming stats there at the beginning that I read. So this is for, let's see, 74 single women in their 20s and 30s, and when I was reading these, like it was kind of crazy to think about. Like I'll just read a couple of these. 23% had engaged in premarital or extramarital sex, 11% had sexed in the last 2 years, and then 70% had masturbated at some point in their life, and 51% admitted that masturbation is currently a struggle, with 20% masturbating at least once a month and 9% masturbating at least a week. And I know that's like super awkward word, but don't turn us off yet. Okay, these are real things. And if that's, I mean, if that's true, I mean, that's a large percent of the women that you meet, like in that age bracket. And so, like, I mean, how do we get here to this point where it's like all these women are struggling in this way?
Yeah, and just so there's context for even the stats that Max just read. So that was a sexual survey I did with the young women at our church. So it was an opt-in, it was an anonymous survey that I did during a summer series we were doing on sexuality. And so this was just within my local church context. And to some degree, I was surprised by some of the numbers, but at the same time, I wasn't. It gave numbers to qualitatively just what I was seeing, as I was meeting with girls on our college campus, as I was meeting with young women in our church who are out of college. And I mean, there's so many ways we got here, and I would actually say the numbers are probably higher now post COVID. I mean, those stats
Mm.
were pre COVID. So, I mean, I would say higher because the last couple of years have shown we just don't have good coping strategies inside the church or outside the church.
Yeah.
So we could learn healthier, more productive coping strategies and do a better job in the church of discipling people about emotions and emotional health.
Yeah. Well, could you just share with us a little bit? I think it's no secret that this subject that you wrote your book over is generally seen as a man's problem. That it's typically men that deal with this. And so, can you share a little bit of your encouragement for why you wanted to share the other side of the story from the female's perspective?
Yeah. So I actually got an email today it fits with this question. I had gotten an email from a young lady who had found my book, and she said, I haven't even read it yet, but even just the title, It's Not Just You, made me feel not so alone. Because she said this isn't like there's many things, even with the young women in my local church context, that kind of all the stories that led to this book, it was feeling like I am a female. This is talked about as guy issues, whether it's masturbation, porn, sexing, like all these other things. It's mostly talked about with guys. And because it's not talked about with females, there just tends to be a little bit more shame associated with it. Like, am I the only one? What's wrong with me that if they're not talking about it, something's got to be really wrong with me. And so not even feeling like I can share it with other females, but share it in the church. And if I do share it and it's not responded to, well, that just increases shame. And there's a lot of isolation in that. And so I just heard that thread so many times. And even when I was starting out in college ministry and girls were sharing these things with me, I just wasn't able to find resources that had girl examples or were for girls. And even that was shame inducing. And so I wrote the book that I wish I could have given out at that point in time, that I wish I could have had at that time, even as I was trying to walk alongside people. So that's pretty much what led to it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's some helpful
and all
context.
these, yeah, and all this stuff in here is based on what you said earlier as your ministry experience, right?
Ministry experience, and I also have a biblical counseling background. So there is some
Okay,
education
gotcha.
in there too. Yeah.
But I mean that was why, I mean, this book came about from just hearing
Mm-hmm.
this stuff and then not seeing
Yep.
the resources out there to,
Absolutely.
adequately try to, deal with this pretty big problem in our society with
Mm-hmm.
both men and women, and men and women inside the church as well as outside the church.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So I just want to mainly talk about too is like what um how does that shame work and that isolation, with the girls and their sexual sin, and like how does that necessarily affect them?
I mean, how it affects all of us. Girls aren't going to be different
Yeah.
necessarily in how shame affects us, but shame has to do with our identity. So, how am I defining myself? How do I see myself? How do I see God seeing me? And one exercise I mentioned this in the book, and it's one that I'll do with people is what are 2 to 5 adjectives that you would use to describe yourself,
Mm.
just out of curiosity. And I give people time to think about that. But those 2 to 5 adjectives that you would use to describe yourself, especially if we're having a counseling conversation,
Yeah.
different contexts you ask that, you might get different responses. But in a counseling conversation, um, just the things that women have shared, and sometimes there's positive things that they mention, but usually there's at least a couple of things that it's just enlightening what they share. So like unlovable, unworthy,
Mm.
fat. Um, there's profanity often in some of the things that they'll give at that point. And so if that's how you see yourself, that affects how you relate to other people. It affects how you relate to God. It affects what do you do to cope with those feelings about yourself. And so oftentimes we engage in behaviors to cope with our feelings. They're coping strategies.
Gotcha. Keegan, do you have anything?
Yeah, no, that's good. I've noticed you mention like this being a coping strategy. I think that's really good, and I think that or it makes a lot of sense. And I can't say that I've ever really, put two and two together. That's why I don't have the degree in the, the ministry of that in that specific context. But I think that was really proved to us, during COVID when we had time to ourselves, and we had to spend time alone, and we had to figure out how are we going to entertain ourselves, and now we're faced with problems, and like a lot of them where we're seeing them every day on the news, and a lot of emotions we never dealt with, and so sometimes we choose to lash out of those irrationally, or do things that we don't even mean. So I think that's a really helpful way to put it. But um I was trying to think of something.
Well, if it's helpful, just even for you or for your listeners, if I had to ask you, and I mean, you can do this even, you don't have to like give me a response right now. This isn't a counseling session. It can be if you want it to be, but no pressure. Um, but even if you're thinking about, okay, when I am stressed, when I am overwhelmed, it's finals. Whenever I am sad, overwhelmed, stressed, or anxious, what do I do with that? How do I cope with that? What are my go-tos? And if I were to have you make a list, and this is something I'll do when I meet with people, but if I were to have you make a list of what do I do to cope when I feel those things? What are ways that I handle it? What kind of things would be on the list? And how many of those things would be healthy and productive? And how many of those things would be unhealthy, unproductive, sinful? Not everything that's unproductive or might be sinful, but some of our unproductive strategies are sinful.
Yeah, and is it obviously like we all have this sinful human nature within us, but that's not like an excuse for this sin. But like, what are some other root causes for the sexual sin that we have? Obviously, it's a coping mechanism, but why is that a coping mechanism? Because I think we all tend to deep down we recognize that like this isn't working. Like I'm not feeling more fulfilled by this or something like that. So like why do we do that?
Why do we cope with sexuality in particular?
Yeah, why do we yeah.
I mean, on a, there could be multiple answers to that, but one that immediately comes to mind is, I mean, our brains like some dopamine. Our brains like endorphins. Our brains,
Yeah.
there's a lot of feel good chemicals that come from sex and sexual activity. And God designed our brains and our bodies to work that way. So when you think about tweaking your mood, like you can tweak your mood with food, you can tweak and affect your mood with sleep or a lack of sleep. You can affect your mood with sex or sexual activity. So there's that. Uh, Another connection point is and this veers into a little bit more somber and serious, but there's several young women that I encounter that abuse is part of their story, and like childhood sexual abuse. And so when you think about, I have these sexual experiences at an age I was not designed to have them, and with people I wasn't designed to have them with. And what that does and how that distorts your view of your body, of yourself, of sexuality. And so I'll see young women get on pathways of sexual behaviors. Um, and it's understandable how they got on that pathway if you know about the abuse in their story. Now, it's still not right that you would act out in these ways, but I can totally see how you got there, because these were things introduced to you in times and ways that were beyond your control, and should not have been done. And you were wronged and you were sinned against. So there's all different reasons for how
Yeah.
and the why for all of us.
Yeah, I wasn't. Yeah, that was that was a broad question. I think. Thanks for answering that. Because like, I think too. Like, is there any like lesser, more common like forms of like trauma or things like that that could like be helpful to fall into this pathway, or is it just kind of like that bigger stuff? Because I know you
Oh,
talk about like wounds in here like a
yeah,
lot.
yeah. I mean, you have big T trauma and little T trauma. And so big T would be the things that you think about, like sexual abuse, rape, domestic violence. But little T traumas are ones that add up over time, and maybe neglect, maybe repeated patterns of being treated or bullied even. And so either whether it's big T or little T trauma, you still are finding ways to cope with it. You've still got to deal with it in some way, and some ways that we deal with it aren't healthy.
So yeah, and you've talked, like you've said, like I said, you talked about that how we cope with that. So what are some healthy ways to cope? You know, we're not going to escape. We're not going to escape. I think we'd be doing a disservice to the people if we always talked about the bad stuff and didn't offer any solutions. You know, if you want to find out, buy the book. But do buy the book, you know. But so yeah, what are some healthy ways that we can cope with the things that are inevitably going to happen in our
Mhm.
lives?
Okay, so I'll give you a moment to think about it, but I want you to think about, what is one thing that you do to cope, fellas? Okay, a good thing that you do to cope when you're stressed, when you're anxious or upset. So while you're thinking of one that you can share, I'll relay one that maybe you wouldn't say, but that's super helpful, and that is breath work. And you might be like, but that's for those weird yoga people that are super granola. And at least that's maybe the response I get from some people where I
Yeah.
live. But the vagus nerve is the longest running nerve in your body. It affects your nervous system, your heart, your lungs. And so when you go into fight or flight, which if you're stressed, if you're anxious, if somebody like really ticks you off, you need to calm down. So how can you calm down? Breathing deeply in through your nose, out through your mouth, doing a couple of reps of that is actually a fast and simple way that you can calm yourself down. That's a helpful coping strategy. You can do it before a test. It helps you think clearer. It's really great before tests. It's good if your mind is racing before you're going to bed, doing breath work. So, but what's something that came to mind as far as a healthy coping strategy that you have?
Keegan, you go first.
Okay, keep thinking, Max. You can't steal mine now.
No, I already have mine.
Oh, really? Okay. So I'd say probably most commonly, I'll do this probably throughout the day sometimes, or sometimes a lot of times in the evening, especially with how pretty the Kansas sunset is. Just go on a walk. I like to just walk. You know, whether it's around a pond or something, or just anywhere really. I like to walk.
That's great. Yeah, that category is movement. So whether
Mhm.
it's exercise, or even like if you feel stuck in some way, whether stuck emotionally or stuck, maybe even you're working on a paper or something and you just feel like brain stuck, get up and move your body. And so I actually, when I'm studying, because I'm working on my doctorate right now, so homework is a thing. Like I'll do breaks like every hour, hour and a half. My house is the cleanest it ever is when I'm in school because my breaks are like, let me go up and fold my laundry. Let me go up and wash my toilet. It's a brain break, but man, it's productive. But it's
Wow.
good for my
Yeah, that's
emotions
good.
too.
I've never thought
Yeah.
of that as a coping strategy because I clean a lot and I keep things clean, but I thought it's just to keep me sane.
It is in more than
Man,
one way.
Right.
You're moving your body. What about you, Max?
I would say that typically, like, I just kind of I have to go somewhere and s- like I'll either go for a little drive and like just go to town and just like with whatever, like go to DG. Like there's nothing to do in this small town, but I'll like go to DG, or I'll like go in my room to just like not even like really doing anything, just like sitting there. And I would say that like I spend a lot of time just like thinking in the shower. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of like my place. Like I can finally be alone and unbothered, and so that's where I usually go to like decompress a little bit.
Yeah. And so even that, Max, connects to two things. One of them is a way that we deal with big emotions, a helpful way is creative outlets. So, and that might be different for every person. So for some, it is like something creative where it's photography or art or music. Maybe it is just being in a place where my mind can just go in a creative sense. Maybe I'm thinking through things. Cooking can be that, gardening can be that, but some sort of creative outlet. And usually, if I'm really stressed, it's the thing I don't feel I have time for. So it goes really quickly. Another thing that might connect if you're doing a lot of thinking is there's meaning making. So blocking out time, whether that's processing time in the shower or maybe it's journaling, maybe it's
Yeah,
praying.
and I actually do journaling
Yeah.
like in spurts. Like sometimes I'll write stuff down, and then sometimes like a lot of times I won't, but there are
Yeah.
times when I do that. And I've
But it,
always found that helpful, but I've been hard to keep that going.
Yeah, it's helping you process. And I tell people, oftentimes we don't do that because we feel like it's so big and overwhelming. Even this week, I've told a couple of girls this, like, set a timer for 5 minutes or 10 minutes and just pick two or three emotions, identify that you feel them, and just journal about them till the timer goes off. 5 minutes. You can do 5 minutes. That's not as overwhelming. And you give yourself permission to put it away when 5 minutes are over. So those are four big categories of coping skills. Probably the a big fifth one would just be social support, calling your friends, hanging out, having people that you can depend on, and also if you're with people, laughter is a huge stress reliever. So people you have fun with, and that you are laughing with. So those are like five of the big categories of coping skills that are productive and healthy.
Yeah,
I
there's a
was just
lot
thinking
there.
when you said laughter, I don't know if this joke will hit, but I was just thinking like Kenneth Copeland will probably be has to be one of the happiest people then. But so
So, anyways, we don't support Kenneth Copeland. Actually,
that's so
he's not. He's
oh my gosh,
just throwing
that's
that out there, just so there's no miscommunication there.
but that was yeah. So in
Um,
the Max, do you have something? Go ahead.
nope, nope. You go. All you.
In the email you sent us, you gave us a couple things we could talk over. And one thing I want to see where you're going to take this. You just said, how do you know whether someone is an addict?
Hmm. Yeah, and that's a very serious question. And it came up because in in my first like group of young women where they started confessing sexual sin, um, and really not just sharing it with me, but sharing it with one another. There was one young lady in that group that her way of talking about her struggle, and it was a couple of sexual sins. Masturbation was definitely a piece of that, and later when she had a boyfriend, acting out sexually with her boyfriend. Um, but she just talked about it with an intensity that was just on a different level than some of the other young women. And in one of my counseling classes in school, we had read and studied a fair amount about sex addiction, which sex addiction is a big umbrella category. So you can have a lot of variety of sexual behaviors that you can be addicted to, and it's called sex addiction. And so even with that, it was okay. I think you might be a sex addict, but how do I actually discern that? And so, a couple of things that come up if you're reading books about addiction and addictive behavior is just what's the obsession level? Like, how much time are you thinking about acting out? So, whatever the behavior is, if it's masturbation, if it's porn, how much time is consumed with obsessing about doing the thing, anticipating it, and really like are you living your life? I mean, I've had one young woman that she barely remembers a lot of college because so much of her college experience was spent acting out and planning to act out. And so, so the obsession and then the behavior is compulsive. It's like once I'm on the train, I can't get off unless like God is just doing some serious intervention. And so maybe I have a certain routine that I follow. So maybe I do it at a particular time of day. Maybe I have this thing that I watch first. It's like my gateway. So if you have any sort of routine, once you start doing the routine, it's really hard to not finish the routine because again, you've been obsessing and even the beginning of doing the routine is there's dopamine that you're experiencing just by launching the routine. So those are things, if you're doing it as a means to cope, that doesn't necessarily mean it's an addiction, but things become addictions because we're using them to cope. And then is it becoming unmanageable? If I can't stop it, and and I mean stop it for like long periods, and you can be like a dry drunk and have periods of sobriety, but but there's some things there with is it unmanageable? Is it affecting my grades? Is it affecting my relationship? Am I continuing to do it despite adverse consequences? Am I feeling like I live a double life? Like nobody knows me. Nobody knows what I'm actually doing. And if they knew, man, they would drop me, which is shame starts speaking. And then do I notice an escalation in behavior? So even if somebody's telling me they're watching porn, some of the questions I start asking is about frequency. How frequently do you watch it? What's the duration? How long are you watching it? But also, have you seen an escalation in your porn use? Like maybe you started with soft porn. Are you watching gay porn or straight porn now? Are you escalating into abuse in the type of porn that you watch? And if we start talking and you are sharing about child porn, that's against the law. Like you're crossing into that territory. And so there's things there. Is there an escalation in the type of porn that you're watching or the types of activities that you're engaging in? So those are some of the questions. If somebody has had another addiction in the past, often they will start another addiction, especially if they're not dealing with the first addiction and why they started that one, they'll start another one. So if a girl has an eating disorder in her background, that's a pretty common one that I see. Alcohol, drugs, all of that can play into whether or not a behavior has become an addiction.
Yeah, and it's really, I mean, it makes sense. It's a natural progression. Um, I feel like I mean, I feel like this is a pretty broad statement, but a lot of the habits we choose to take up are because of inadequacies in other parts of our life, and we're or not like things that we think are inadequacies. Not actually that we are inadequate, but um, and you speaking to the fact that it does start with this like, hey, it was an innocent thing, but it progresses. It continues to progress. That's no secret. But I think that's really good that you're bringing light to this. Max, do you have anything else for this episode?
I don't think that I do. So, do you have anything?
I think we can save the rest of it for next time.
I know.
Okay.
We're ready.
All right. Well, peace out, basic family.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Christian Campfire Conversations. I'll see you next week.